Let's bring in our guest now. We are having a conversation on meaningful discourse on agriculture, on food security, and agribusiness, and we call this Agri Talk in the Situation Room. Oded Joseph is the Israeli ambassador to Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Seychelles, and Malawi. Man, you cover a wide region. Welcome to the studio.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you? I'm so pleased to join you early this morning.
Thank you.
You seem to be very proud of yourself, of being here early this morning.
Yes, I'm very happy. Actually, as I said, I think the one advantage is you're not stuck in traffic. So
Yeah.
that's one advantage. We always have to look at the full half of the glass, right?
Yes. It's always half full. So tell us about the work that the embassy does. So your embassy covers this wide region, and this is therefore representing the government of Israel.
Correct. Yes. The Embassy of Israel in Nairobi is accredited to 5 countries. As you've mentioned, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, the Seychelles, and Uganda. So the scope of what we're doing is very wide, and we're very happy. We have many challenges. We're always busy, never boring. So what can one ask
Yeah.
if not such an interesting and challenging work?
Yes. Because this is Agri Talk and you're talking about food security. Every time we talk about food security and, growing food in the desert, conversations will always come up about, how Israel have been able to do it. And they're even exporting their food secure. Is it true? Israel is food secure?
Absolutely. I think it came out of a very harsh necessity. When the modern Israel was reestablished in 1948, we understood we have to meet 2 big challenges, immediate challenges. The first was our own security. Unfortunately, when the modern Israel was established, our neighbors were not very happy with it, so they have challenged us on the security level. And we had to very quickly, and we were lucky to do so, to develop a good defense forces that was enabled us to defend ourselves by ourselves. The second issue was to make sure that we are food secured in an arid land. 2/3 of Israel is in arid land. So we had to be very creative about developing those technologies which allow us to make sure that we have enough vegetables, enough fruits, enough food for the population of Israel. So that, I think, brought about what is known today as the startup nation. Unique technologies, creative technologies that allowed us to grow and develop the agriculture sector, even though, as I said, 2/3 of Israel is an arid area.
So how much of your budget do you spend on agriculture every year in terms of percentages?
Wow.
Is it a bigger percentage of this? I'm sure defense takes quite a bit as well.
Well, it's mainly now in it's business. So at the moment, it's not really dependent on or leaning on the Israeli budget, the national budget. So it became very successful at the business level. So I think that's part of the secret. But definitely, it is being still very much one of our main sectors. And as I said, a good way to export our technologies, our unique technologies, and to share it with our good friends around the world.
So, obviously, this has become something that you've been able to do in terms of export this information to other countries, and Kenya being one of them. What are some of the ways that you've been working with Kenya to make sure that Kenya also can at least take steps towards food security? I mean, I know it's far away. There's still many things to be done, but what are some of the ways that you've been working together to get Kenya on this?
Yeah, there are a few major and important pillars of cooperation in this sector. The first is capacity building. Sharing our experience and sharing and having capacity building courses, whether courses being held by the Israeli Agency for International Development Cooperation called Mashab, that are being offered to anyone who is interested in the field of agriculture. We are very proud of a 11-month program that is being taken place in the last few years, whereby agriculture students that have graduated in your best universities or best TVETs are arriving in Israel for 11-month program. They're being allocated to different farms, and they work with their own hands. They touch with their own hand Israeli technologies. They are part and parcels of different types of farms in Israel. And with that experience, after 11 months, they also save money in Israel. They are probably the best human resource to adapt what they've seen in Israel and the Israeli perspective of how to grow and how to develop agriculture sectors to the unique necessities and environment here in Kenya. So I think this has been a very successful program, and we are now very much focused on the alumni of this program to see how we could facilitate with the government of Kenya for them to become successful agripreneurs. So capacity building was definitely one of these modes of cooperation. The second is building up centers of excellence and model farms. One of them is well known as Galana Kulalo, which is in one of your arid areas. As we speak, we have a great cooperation with Embu County. We are now discussing to establish an agricultural technical center in one of the Don Bosco's schools in Embu County. And this center would offer capacity building, would be a test ground for Israeli technologies, those who are already well proven, or startups, agri startups that will be tested in this farm to be adapted to the unique necessities and environment in Kenya. There are other aspects of this agriculture center which we could develop if you want afterwards, but I think this is another very important component, the issue of agriculture centers or centers of excellence. Last but not least is the business sector, the agribusiness sectors. Again, tomorrow, we're happy to have the Israeli Agri Fair in Embu County, whereby Israeli companies will be meeting farmers, corporates, to see how they could utilize those technologies on a business-to-business level. So I think there are many ways and many pillars of our cooperation, and I'm very proud of that because it has been in the past and it is still today. The food security is still today at the heart of the cooperation between Israel and Kenya.
Why Embu and why not any of the other 47 counties?
The more the merrier. Let me just say that one of the issues that we are now discussing with the government of Kenya is exactly that, to get the priorities driven by the government of Kenya, where else we could place centers of excellence. With Embu County, it has been developing as part of our cooperation with that county, but it's not limited to Embu County. Galana Kulalo is actually in 2 counties in Kenya.
Actually, Your Excellency, why I asked is maybe there's something unique about Embu that gave it an advantage. That is actually what I was asking. Because if, say, for instance, that your technology in rehabilitating and changing semi-arid or arid areas into profitable farmland, I don't expect that to happen in central Kenya. I expect you to go to the northern part of the country. So it's with that in mind that I asked the question.
No, I think it's a valid question, and I think it's a relevant question. And as I said, the first model farm that we have established was in an arid area, and that is in Galana Kulalu. We're very much open to try and open these centers of excellence in other parts that are arid. But I think in that respect, you shouldn't also neglect the more fertile places because you could produce more.
True.
So the priorities are being set by the Kenyan side. We are happy to join forces and to share from our experiences in a manner that we work with local experts, because you cannot, even with the Israeli perspective, it cannot be adapted in an effective manner without that being done with local experts, because only the mutual trial of how you utilize Israeli technologies within this unique environment of Kenya that would ensure it will be successful. You cannot just import something that was successful in Israel and just imitate it. You have to adapt it to the unique
Conditions,
circumstances, and that could be only done by joint forces of Israeli experts with Kenyan experts.
Right.
The Kulalu issue, the project that you mentioned, there was a time it had some hiccups. Was that resolved?
Well, let me just say the following. I think if you would ask any professional kulima, any professional farmer, any professional agronomist, you would see how successful the model farm in Galana Kulalu was, in the sense that by utilizing Israeli expertise and Israeli technologies, you've been able to increase the crops for at least 4 times compared to the average. And rather than having 19 sacks out of 1 acre, you have at least 40 out of each acre. And rather than growing just 1 season a year, you're growing 2 seasons a year, which means that you have managed in an arid area to grow 4 times the amount of crops from the same acre. Has it been handled in a perfect manner? Unfortunately, no. There was, as you said, a little bit of hiccups. But I think, and you were asking me about the story of the Israeli success. I think one of the reasons for the Israeli success is that we were never been hesitant to make mistakes, or we've never even been hesitant to fail. And if you are working under that assumption, you learn from your mistakes. So going back to Galana Kulalu, there are many successes, but we could also learn from the mistakes that took place in that specific project.
Is it an ongoing project now? Because you mentioned it, and just when we're talking about how Kenya and Israel were able to work together, it was one of the first things that you mentioned. So obviously, it would be one of the star projects in the country. And in terms of potential, it had so much, and I say had, I'm hoping that we can say have, it has so much potential in terms of what it can produce for the country. Is it still ongoing with the support of the Israeli government?
Well, I'll be very honest. It's really the decision of the Kenyan side. The model farm is there. We have put forward a very detailed proposal to all the relevant agencies in Kenya, how we could move on from the model farm in Galana Kulalu to a national scale program that would establish at least 3 centers of excellence in counties that will be chosen by the Kenyan government of the Kenyan counties. So this is a very detailed proposal. I believe it's now being considered by the relevant Kenyan agencies, and I think it's it's their decision whether and when we could take it to the next step.
Was it part of the plan that you get to a point where then you'll come up with a proposal on what next? Or is this you adapting to the challenges that you faced in Galana Kulalu, where you got to a point where you didn't get exactly where you wanted to be, you made the mistakes like you're saying, you've learned from the mistakes, now you're trying to see how you can correct the cause? Or was this part of the original plan?
The original plan was to see the Galana Kulalu as a model farm. Yes, absolutely. And from model farms, you always learn what were the positive and the more successful aspects of it, and what you could do in order to improve. So I think the original thinking was that we need few years to make sure that we could learn from this model farm.
And what are those lessons that you took now from this model, the main project or the experiment in Galana Kulalu? What are these lessons that you saw? This, we made a mistake here and we have learned a lesson.
No, I think you need the relevant partners to sit here together to analyze it. I don't want to do it on their behalf. There was, of course, here the cooperation between an Israeli company and with the local agencies, and of course with the local government, the local county governments. So I think, they're the best ones to do this analysis. What is important from my perspective is that this is another illustration of good cooperation that is taking place between Israel and Kenya. And specifically, the model farm in Galana Kulalu and other projects on food security were part of the directive of both our leaders that met in 2016 and again in 2017, both President Kenyatta and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So my part, or the embassy part, is to be committed to see how and what could be done from our side to make sure that this specific projects and other similar projects are successful for the benefit, I think, of both Israel and Kenya.
For many years, the Israeli embassy has been in Nairobi. The cooperation between Kenya and Israel has spanned many decades.
Since
But
1963.
But it's the first time now that we've been in the last couple of years that we're hearing of this direct cooperation between Kenya and Israel when it comes to agriculture and technology. Model farm in Galana Kulalu, a new project in Embu. How do you explain that gap? What has been happening before?
No, I don't think there was a gap. Well, with the one exception that we did have a few years that Kenya decided to sever its relations with Israel. So that's the period. Maybe there was a little bit of a gap. Even then, I don't think it's accurate, because even when we did not have formal diplomatic relations, we still had a lot of cooperation taking place behind the scenes. But actually, I'm very proud of the type of cooperation that has been developing between Israel and Kenya, even before the independence of Kenya, much way before the independence
Actually,
of Kenya.
1903.
Yes, exactly. So I think, and everyone, let me share with you an anecdote that I'm not sure that many know. But as part of these relations that took place and the engagement that took place even before the independence of Kenya was the good cooperation and good engagement between Israeli leaders and the Kenyan leaders. One of them very well known, who happened to be the first president of Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta. And during the colonial times, President Jomo Kenyatta was under home arrest. Israeli officials and Israeli leaders were still engaging with him, to a point where the colonial powers warned the Israelis not to engage and not to meet under home restrictions and home arrest of Jomo Kenyatta. But we were not deterred, because I think friends are being tested when you're in need, and I think we definitely make sure that we want to continue that engagement. Of course, the story of our relations, we have many examples of when Kenya extended their hand towards Israel. The most famous one is under the Entebbe operation. There are many examples of that, and I'm very proud to say that what characterizes our relations is that it goes beyond cooperation that is based on just mutual interest, which is good enough and important enough, but it's truly based on true friendship, and I'm very proud of that.
Actually, what is also not known is at the time when certain parts of Kenya were considered to be part of the Uganda territory that was under the British, the Israelis were actually offered a portion of that land for settlement.
That is absolutely correct.
Yes. So the relationship, as His Excellency says, is a very, very, very old one.
That is very correct. And as you know, there's a saying, wherever you have two Israelis or two Jews, you have at least three opinions. This plan was debated in the Israeli in the Jewish institution at that time, and it was voted against for the simple reason that anyone who reads the Bible recognizes that the natural place for Israel to be established is in our homeland, in Israel, and the land of Zion, the land of Jerusalem. So, and of course, as you know, this is exactly what happened. But I think it could have been very interesting, and for us to be immediate neighbors of Kenya.
It would have been very interesting. In fact, what you're actually saying is that the entire history of this particular region would have changed completely.
Well, I don't know, but as I said, it would have been interesting. But at the end of the day, I think, as I said earlier, it was only natural for the modern Israel to be reestablished in our homeland, in the land of Israel, land of Jerusalem.
But it couldn't have been easy. Would you say, therefore, that just the process of building a nation, not really from scratch, because it had existed before, that, as you correctly put it at the beginning of our discussion, that just that particular process developed within the people of Israel a certain mindset towards looking at problems, dealing with problems, and finding solutions?
Absolutely. I think what is unique about our story is that we were forced for 2,000 years to be spread all over the world. Jews were spread all over the world. My parents were born and raised up in Egypt. My wife's parents were born and raised up in Poland and in Germany. You have Israelis that originated from every part of the world that you can imagine. And so when they all came back in 1948 to reestablish the modern Israel, they actually came back slightly earlier, but the establishment and the independence of Israel was in 1948. When they came back, on the one hand, each and every one of them came with the cultures that they've absorbed for the last 2,000 years. So they spoke different languages, but at the same time, there was something very, very strong that united us, even though when we were spread out in the exile, and that is the Hebrew language and that is the Jewish Bible and Jewish culture. So the common ground was so strong that it overcame the fact that people were spread over the world for 2,000 years. The other aspect of it, and I think you alluded to that, is the immediate challenges that we had on our own security. So we had to fight very early to ensure our survival. And that created, I think, as I said earlier, a strong defense capability and creativity, which is the basis of our startups. And
On that note of creativity, in the recent past, there has been some heartwarming international movements that have been made with Israel, associating with countries that previously they didn't have diplomatic relationships. For instance, the Arab League countries, Bahrain, UAE, Morocco, etc. Now, that is what we read, but what took place? What has the country had to do to get to this point?
well, you're very right pointing out that the Middle East is a totally different Middle East compared to 2 decades ago.
Yes.
If in the past the way to characterize the Middle East was to say that this is a region where Arabs are fighting against Israelis, Arabs are against Israel, they want to make sure that we are being thrown to the sea. For the last 2 decades, it's totally different because you actually should characterize the Middle East by the countries that are moderate, that want to see stability and peace, versus very few countries, unfortunately Iran is heading them, that are aiming to destabilizing the region by utilizing proxies, utilizing terrorist infrastructure and so on. So the division is truly between moderates and extremists today in the Middle East. And what you're viewing today, you're rightly referring to the peace and normalizations between Israel and many of those Arab countries. This is exactly due to the fact that we understood we have to join forces to make sure that the Middle East is stable.
How then do we get the country into that state of food security? We have got a policy in place on food and nutrition security. We've got programs that have been run by the government at national level, at county level, and the Israeli government is working with Kenyan government to help on this. There's something that you said that caught my attention, and this is how immediately the government and the people of Israel focused on that, food security. And currently, it's now being run majorly by the private sector. What are the lessons that then you can learn on what the government can do and how the private sector can be incentivized to invest in food security? Looking at what you've seen, you've traveled around the country. What is it that you see, the gaps that you see that the Kenyans can learn?
Well, I can tell you from Israel's experience what was one of the secrets or one was the factors of success. And I think one important factor was that the Israeli government was committed to supply the basic infrastructure that is needed for the farmer to grow its crops. He had to pay for it, the farmer, but the responsibility, for example, to make sure that each and every land has intake of water, which is an infrastructure that the farmer cannot make sure that he cannot take responsibility on his own, or he cannot make sure that that type of infrastructure is being given to him. This is the commitment that the Israeli government has done. We would supply you as the farmer the basic infrastructure you need in order to develop your farm, which is intake of water, which is the roads that you need to access to the farm and to get out of the farm and to take your produce to market your produce to the market. And last but not least is, of course, the energy aspect of it. So these are the responsibilities that the government has taken upon itself. The farmer had to pay for those services, but once he was given these basic infrastructure, he could go on to develop its farm. This was one very important factor that I think is a lesson that we have learned that is very crucial. Whether it is adapted here or whether it's relevant for Kenya, I think you would know better than me.
So what you're saying is that the basic, whether it is infrastructure, which of course now relates to roads, the provision of water, all these things that would make it possible for one to actually start the business was made available.
Exactly. Roads, water, and
Energy.
These were the three components that the farmer knew that he could trust the government that would be supplied for him.
What
From
about
that
markets?
point onwards, he had to, he was on his own.
How about markets, development of markets, like the food markets around the various growing areas?
No, that was, of course, mostly the responsibility of the farmer himself. What worked for Israel and might also work for Kenya is that we, especially at the beginning, when Israel was a young country, we were mostly organized as what is known as kibbutzim, as corporates. So a group of farmers actually they were grouping together to take care not only of how you develop the land, but also how you market your produce. So maybe that's another very important component of our success. That at least at the beginning, the agriculture sector was organized by corporates, by kibbutzim.
Okay, but then this kibbutzim was actually now being supported by government in terms of encouraging the farmers to come together, form your kibbutz, and then now the farmers will move ahead on what they can do within the kibbutz in terms of developing their own markets.
Yeah, the kibbutz was encouraged by the government in the sense that it really gave an answer to two of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. Kibbutz was also a unit where you could secure the land that was surrounding it. You had in the kibbutz also, everyone in Israel had to go to compulsory military service. So the kibbutz also the location and the manpower in the kibbutz also served as defenders of the country. And the second aspect that they took care of is food security by developing the agriculture sector within the kibbutz.
What I hear you saying is this, that the driving force behind all the things we are mentioning is a commitment that your people have to their country, and having that commitment, and the government, whichever government it is, a commitment again to the people. And in so doing, when these two commitments combine, you then have people who work in tandem, and they're able to produce whatever they're producing. The reason why I say this is because when you say compulsory military service,
until today, by the way.
Yes.
For men and women.
Yes. I asked myself, okay, my colleagues are laughing. Imagine a situation where in this country you had compulsory military service for everybody.
Well, again, these are different situations. We can't, it's a bit dangerous to take an example from, one country and say, you have to imitate it one by one.
The reason why I mention it, we didn't have a compulsory military service, but we had a compulsory youth service. All right? Compulsory. You get to a certain point in your education, that period before you go to university, compulsory. It was discontinued. And why I mentioned the word commitment is because if I were in power in an African country, I would be afraid. Having all these people with a military background, and I'm not certain that they support me. Essentially, it's like I'm building up my own opposition. It's the last thing that I would encourage. That's why I talk about the commitment the people had to their country. Yes.
No, you're very right. I mean, this is a very strong component, and I think it derives from the very strong bond that I was mentioning earlier that Jews had when they came back to establish the modern Israel. We in our history faced many challenges. As we were for 2,000 years spread in the exile, away from our homeland. Today, we are marking the International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Tell us a little bit about that.
This is one of the darkest chapters in the history of humanity, where Jews were murdered. 6 million Jews were murdered by Nazi Germany. That developed the race theory that concluded under so-called research and science that the Jewish race has to be exterminated, that they have to be eradicated because they contaminate humanity. And Jews, even though they might have been converted for years, they couldn't have changed this fate because scientifically, by this Nazi regime and based on this Nazi race theory, they should have been eradicated because otherwise they contaminate humanity. So I think this is a very dark chapter of history, and the bright side of it, if you can find the bright side of it, is that the decision that the UN has made to mark this International Remembrance Day is that it, I think, illustrates the importance of the commitment of the international community to make sure that future genocides will not take place. And you can only do it by remembering the Holocaust and other genocides, learning the lessons, looking for the early signs of hatred and the implications of hatred, and making sure that together you fight these phenomena in order to prevent, God forbid, future genocides.
Does it fuel a lot of the current decisions that are made? The remembrance of this and the things that happened, you know, during that time. I mean, you talked about Jews having been scattered across the world and then brought back to Israel, and then thereafter, the current decisions that are made, are they made with that remembrance in mind in terms of what is going to protect for the future?
Absolutely, yes. I think, again, if you look at the history of the Jewish people, you would see that we were challenged many times. And God, you know, with God's help, we overcame those challenges. But going back to your point, I think the main lesson for us is that we must always make sure that there is an independent Israel, whereby Jews would be able to express their national identity, and in a manner that we are able to defend ourselves by ourselves. I think this is a very strong component of our identity, which drives many of the activities and initiatives and the modus operandi of the State of Israel.
Talking of the Holocaust, is there anything you have in your educational system that ensures that anyone who is born a Jew will never forget what brought about this terrible situation?
Absolutely. This is very strong in the education system in Israel. Of course, there is the most famous museum in Jerusalem called Yad Vashem that is dedicated for the remembrance of the Holocaust. In fact, I think in Israel it definitely takes place. I think I'm encouraged to see that also the international community has joined efforts together to take education and research on the Holocaust as a tool to make sure that future genocides will not take place. This is, I think, this was what was behind the decision of the UN to adopt a special resolution to have this International Remembrance Day of the Holocaust. This is what drives another organization, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that was based on Stockholm 2000 Declaration. Unfortunately, we also have to fight those who insist on denying the Holocaust, and they are, accusing or claiming that this whole issue of the Holocaust was a total lie.
And they're growing, by the way. It's not as though the numbers are getting less.
Unfortunately, they are growing. Unfortunately, there is one regime, again, that leads these efforts, and that is the specific existing regime of Iran. In a very sarcastic manner today, as we are marking the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, Vice President of Iran decides to visit today Kenya, very sarcastically in this specific day. But I'm encouraged to see that there are many forces that are fighting against this denial, and there are many forces in countries, actually the vast majority of the countries are joining forces to remember the Holocaust, to learn and to educate the lessons of the Holocaust and other genocides.
I'm still fascinated by how humanity can actually watch by and see these things happen. The UN were present in Rwanda when the terrible things that happened in Rwanda happened. It isn't as though they were far away, and yet it happened. So when they, for whatever reason, decide to mark this day, well, it's, let me not say what I'm thinking, but let me ask this question. What do you do on a day like this to remember the day? What activities are encouraged, or what do you have on this particular day?
Well, in a few hours' time, there is a special ceremony that, of course, we have to do it online because of COVID-19. A ceremony that is being organized jointly by the UN here in Nairobi, the Embassy of Israel, with representation also of the government of Kenya. So we will have a special ceremony to commemorate this day. For me, personally, I think one of the best ways to remember is to search for the stories of the individuals we are mentioning that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, but behind this number, there are individuals. About 1 million, more than 1 million of them were children. Many students, people at different ages with different occupations. I want to, at least, this is what I do, and I would like to encourage maybe others to go to the Yad Vashem site and search for this beautiful program of mentioning the names, lighting a candle for each name of person that was murdered in the Holocaust, and to learn who he was, what was his story. I think when you look at when you learn the history of the Holocaust or what happened in the Holocaust through the personal stories, through diaries of personal people that managed to write diaries under this horrific chapter of history, I think this is the best way to get the sense of what has happened there. And not to get the sense for the sake of the remembrance is not for the sake of remembrance. I think what is important is to remember, research, and learn for the sake of making sure that we will not have another genocide, whether it's against, God forbid, Jews, or whether it's against Africans, or whether it's against any other race or any other ethnic group.
So let me just flip the coin here. As you say, as you're remembering the Holocaust and the lessons learned, what also does the state of Israel do to promote peace? Peace among the people who live with you and peace with your neighbors. I'm talking about this, of course, with reference to the ongoing conflict with the Palestinians. Now, there's the other issues around the Middle East, and you've said the face of the Middle East is changing rapidly in the last couple of years. But in terms of promoting peace and ensuring that there's peaceful coexistence among people who are close to one another, what does the state of Israel do?
Well, it's a crucial issue for us. We want to live in peace with our neighbors, and the Palestinians are our immediate neighbors. So this is very high on our priority. Every government in Israel has extended its hand in order to find a compromise with our Palestinian neighbors to be in a manner that we could live side by side. So I think this has been in the past and will always continue to be one of the more important goals and objectives of Israel. Unfortunately, we are not there yet with the Palestinians themselves. We still have to sit down and find that way out, this compromise. For us, the crucial aspect of it is to see the leadership and the people of the Palestinian recognizing that the importance of the existence of Israel as the only place on earth where we could express our national identity. And I think all Israelis, at least the vast majority of Israelis, understand that Palestinians are our immediate neighbors, and we have to find the way out and to reach peace with them. I'm encouraged to say that more and more countries, among those Arab countries that in the past, at least definitely 2 decades ago, we see more and more countries in the Middle East that are now normalizing their relations with Israel. So this has to continue to be our direction, and this is one of the more important goals for us to continue to make sure that we could live securely in our homeland.
How about encouraging other people? How about encouraging other people to come and live within Israel? And I'm asking this in the context of, for example, the news that several thousands of refugees who've sought refuge in Israel could be transported out of Israel to another country. There have been talks with Rwanda and others. Why is that?
Well, I think there is a little bit of a confusion between refugees and illegal work seekers. So I think what you're referring to is truly the phenomena that took place in the last few years in Israel is more related to illegal work seekers, which we had to deal like any other country would have dealt with. In terms of accepting refugees, we did in the past. Numbers that we could accommodate, and we continue to do so. Just recently, I think the most famous and most relevant aspect that I could highlight is the way we have treated Syrians that are now still suffering civilian war. They have namely treated them medically, but very few also were being able to be absorbed. So I think this is definitely something that Israel has been done, will continue to be doing. But you also have to remember that the first and foremost, the essence of the state of Israel is to make sure that Jewish refugees are able to find home in one secured place, in the only place that they could also express their national identity. So the combination of all this, I think, brings us definitely to a point where we are accommodating and dealing with this challenge that is now spread all over the world.
But these illegal work seekers, so people who have moved into the country illegally, they're looking for better opportunities. Why would you not find a way of accommodating them, of understanding where they've come from? And I'm talking about this in the global context. A couple of years ago, so the Syrians and others from North Africa have tried to seek their way into better, greener pastures, for example, in Europe, and they are tagged as illegal immigrants. And then, the treatment of such people, despite the conditions where they've come from, despite what they've gone through, is still put under question, under spotlight globally. So when, for example, now Israel says, these are people who have come and they're illegal work seekers, and so we have got to find a neutral country which can accommodate them. Why a neutral country?
Again, I think this is a challenge and a phenomenon that many countries in the world are facing, and Israel, like every other country, is trying to accommodate it in the best manner possible. It's also an issue of volume. There's a volume of illegal work seekers that you cannot accommodate, and then it becomes a challenge on your economy and challenge on your security. So I don't think we are immune, like other countries, from trying from making maybe mistakes, but we are doing our best, like many other countries in the world, to accommodate this challenge in the best manner possible.
Well, I mean, as we look at now the challenges that the world continues to face now, COVID-19 is one of them. And I know that in terms of an approach, you've taken a very robust approach as Israel in terms of vaccines and things like this, making sure that populations are, the population within the country is vaccinated. How is that going right now? And how have you been able to make that happen?
Well, first, to be fair, I think we are still, like most of the countries in the world, we are still facing this challenge, and we're still struggling as to what is the best way to meet this challenge. One of the important issues that all of us are facing is how do you strike this fine balance between continuing normal life and at the same time meeting the challenge. At the moment, there's still a rise in the number of people affected by this virus, but there is a hope in the sense that Israel began a very, very bold campaign of giving vaccinations to the Israeli public. We have managed very, very quickly. In a few weeks' time, we're now at the point that almost 30% of our relevant population has taken the vaccine, and I think this is due to two factors. The first was that we were very quick to purchase the vaccines, even before it was fully approved by the FDA. We took the risk. We bought two types of vaccines, and we made sure that it's going to be stored in Israel. And once the FDA approval was given, we began giving the vaccine. So this was factor number one. Factor number two is that the public health organizations in Israel are very effective. They've been established even the pre-independence of Israel, the first and basic one. Since then, we have more than one operator, and the digitation of the records of medical records in Israel is very, very effective. So the combination of having early enough vaccines with very effective medical operators, and with the digitation of the system, I think this is what allowed us to very quickly.
So you know exactly where all your people
Everybody
are.
is.
You more or less have a very clear idea of the demographics that relate to these people.
Yes.
Now, what
yes. I'm here.
Yes.
And I got from my operator an SMS. Please, you're at the right age to come and you're at the right age group to come and get the vaccine.
Right.
And if I'm not responding, I'm getting a reminder. So yes, it has been very effective. But again, I want to be fair. We are far from, all of us, I think, are far from saying this is.
We're on
Yeah,
solid
we have
ground.
one.
now.
Yeah,
What
that's-
would you have done if the vaccines had turned out not to be what you thought they might be?
Well, first of all, future will still say. I mean, the question is still there.
Yeah.
If we are honest, I think none of us really know how effective this vaccine is. It seems to be effective, including on 2 mutations that were imported to Israel. So these are that is the interim conclusion of our experts in Israel. Let's hope it's true. But I think also we bought our vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. I think also for them, because we have done it such in a concentrated manner, an effective manner. I think we would be for them a very interesting.
From my reading, I gathered that one of the things that the Israeli government did as part of the understanding and agreement, they allowed Pfizer Moderna to take the data, or to at least have access to the data of the vaccination process.
There would be a bit of a sharing of the data, no doubt. I think it will be a way that this could be our contribution
Yeah.
to understanding how effective those vaccines are.
Can I ask you the last question? We saw also reports yesterday that the UN has leaned in and said, there should have been some help offered from Israel to Palestine when it did come to vaccinations. Maybe frowning a little bit that has not and is not happening. Would you say that it is because of the challenges that Israel faces on its own before it's even able to lend a helping hand in terms of vaccinations to Palestine, or are the current frictions between the two countries contributing to that?
No, it has nothing to do with the friction. I think this is also in our interest, and I don't think it's accurate to say that there is a great amount of cooperation behind the scenes between medical authorities in Israel and medical authorities in the Palestinian Authority. But as you said, these are 2 separate entities. So we have purchased and bought those vaccines for the Israeli public, and the Palestinian Authority have their chance and their way to do the same thing for their own population. It's in our interest to see that happening. So a lot of our experience and a lot of issues that deal with capacity building and coordination is taking place and will continue to take place.
Mr. Oded Joseph, Ambassador of Israel to Kenya, just take a minute, give your closing remarks. Speak to the people of Kenya on behalf of the people of Israel. What would you say? What would you tell us?
I would first and foremost say that I'm very proud of our friendship. That, as I said earlier, is not only based on cooperation of mutual interest, but it's really true friendship. And I'm happy that this is the way to characterize, I think, our friendship. I see much more potential, and we could do much more to enhance this cooperation and this friendship, and that's why I'm here, and I'm very much committed to that, myself and the staff of the embassy, for the benefit of both Kenyans and Israelis. You have a beautiful country, lovely people. I enjoy every minute here. And I know that many of my colleagues are very envious of me that I'm the ambassador to.
That you're here and they're not.
Exactly. So they'll have to wait before
Let them wait their turn.
Exactly.
Enjoy your stay here for as long as
Thank
you're here,
you.
Oded Joseph, Ambassador of Israel to Kenya, also representing Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, and the Seychelles. Asante sana. We hope to have you again soon.
Thank you very much. It was a truly pleasure.
Thank you
My pleasure.
so much.
Pleasure was ours.